couch.
Oh, but then without the bag and all that stuff.
Put it in here.
Nice meeting you. Yes.
Maybe also someone on the other side. Works fine.
Does it maybe spread?
Yeah, maybe spread around.
Yes, that's great.
Please, everyone, please take a seat in the Orange Hall. We're about to start the BK Talks.
All right. We need to get started. Please bring yourselves and your drinks to the Orange Tribune and the seats that are in front of it. The fact that you're sitting here in this space doesn't mean that you are forced to speak if you don't wish to. What is it? Cynic panic. How do you say? Yeah. So, worry? What? Inge, please. Please. Take a seat. Short, you are one of the participants. Amber. Okay, we really need to get started. So for those standing back there, I beg you to please join us in the BK Talks. So good evening again, everyone. And good evening to all those that, or good evening, or good morning, or good day to all those that will be watching us online via the YouTube channel of the BK Public Programs. As I already mentioned earlier, it's really a moment of happiness to be able to have this kind of projects finally realized and open like we just did. So tonight, we are going to have a discussion about pedagogies of indigenism within the context of the exhibition on Indigenous Intelligence. I hope that Indigenous Intelligence is not just something that we consume, that we come here to watch and enjoy and, as I said, consume, but I hope that we learn from it and that we can teach it as educators. That's one of the functions or the missions of this project. I'm going to explain very briefly how this happened. As curator of public programs, every semester I'm responsible together with the team to organize an exhibition within the Oostserre. This time we sent this letter to, I think, about 60 professors within the faculty, all departments. And what you see here tonight is a selection of the contributions, the numerous contributions that we received after this call was made. I decided this time that probably sending this to the professors would let us, or would let the letter be filtered rather than using other means. We keep trying. It's just maybe a process of trial and error. Maybe next time we will try to do the open call in a different way. But still, I hope, or I believe that the call is really open. One of the things that I really like the most about this call is the fact that the work that you see here doesn't belong to one section, to one department, to one part of the faculty. This exhibition gathers the work of the entire Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. This is one of the missions that when I was asked to be curator of public programs, I wanted to do. Was the idea to open up our drawers, your drawers, and show work that probably you don't see otherwise because you are every day, we all are, very busy in our smaller corners. So this is a proof of the success of that idea in the beginning. It doesn't always happen, but at this time it was. I want to thank everybody who participated, as I already did. Undertaking this project has been quite a task. This is my email box. And what you see there is I typed this morning Indigenous Intelligence exhibition as a subject. And I looked at this. I found in all my mailboxes 921 emails with that subject. This is just not to say, wow, he sent so many emails, not at all. This is just to say how much communication has been going between us and all of you. This is just my email box, but of course there's the other email boxes of the collaborators. I think this kind of collaboration and communication is extremely important. We have managed, as I mentioned earlier, to tell each other stories, and I thank you very much for having shared so many stories with us, even though, of course, writing and responding to so many emails sometimes is, as you can understand, very exhausting. But the results are there. So we are telling stories about many different places in the entire world, starting from the Netherlands, of course. I'm not going into each of the stories here. Some are really touching, especially because we all sometimes feel more related to some places than others. Probably you do as well. I will not go into the details of everything that is there because I think that the project and the stories are better told within the exhibition. No? But all in all, I think it's really important that you see the beauty in many cases of the material that is shown, as well as the depth of the work that has been produced, the amount of great design that is included in this exhibition, and the amount of different, as I mentioned, places, points of origin, points of departure, approaches, etc., that are embedded within these collaborations. So again, thank you very much. Probably you recognize yourselves, you recognize your works. We could tell lots of anecdotes within the team about your stories and everything that has happened between. But I really wouldn't like to start any kind of, dramatic tale or anything like that, nor have I the capacity to really tell each of the stories. I think that the stories are better told within the exhibition. As I mentioned, we have work coming from all over the world and different approaches. I also would like to thank very much the work that Heidi here did in order to gather an enormous amount of work coming from her team. And I thank you very much for having organized it so well. So that helped very much for the entire selection process. I think that the least is that Heidi would tell us how did she approach this open call. I'm going to talk about the design of the exhibition. The design of the exhibition started with an idea like this. I think these were conversations with the team. I think Jesse lives in some kind of landscape like this. One of the things that we were discussing is that our Indigenous Intelligence exhibition didn't have to bring us to remote places. That indigenous intelligence is also in the places that we inhabit. For starters, Delft, or for starters, the Netherlands. No? So how do we connect in a certain way to the places or the landscapes where we live? This is a very simple way, but an effective one, this postcard, no? And you all know what this is about. So this is what we try to achieve with the design of this exhibition, no? This idea of the polder, the idea of the organization of the landscape as an infrastructure. Some explanation about it is that we found out, or Max, I think, exactly found out here that the school is located there, where you see it. And back then there was a river that passed, underneath our feet, right at the place where the blue band is located. I thought it was necessary for you to know why we have a blue band over there. That's the reason, because we are talking about the former landscape that we are stepping on right now. There's a lot of attachment, of course, within indigenous intelligence to the land, to water, to community. No? And I also would like to thank the work of, for instance, Inge Bovink. There she is, which also took the effort of gathering the work of all her students. Managing all that takes quite a lot of energy, and it's actually extra time from your work. So I want to thank you for that as well. Anyway, this is the band, how it is now. And finally, how to organize all this information. I don't think this is nothing new, but of course we wanted to relate indigenous intelligence to natural systems. It's done in a very well-known book, Low Tech, by Fleur Watson. And no, not Fleur Watson. Sorry, I'm blanking. Thank you very much. That's somebody else. So the work is organized according to the biomes where the pieces are located. Of course, there are exceptions. There are groups of projects like the ones that Inge Bovink has gathered, but I think that's also well explained within the space. Let's not talk about all the design and all the effort that we took. How do you make something better out of the exhibition, etc. So we came up with the idea of the perspex, etc. No? So what I want you to do after these BK talks is to really take a look at the magnificent work that is shown. No? And I have spent quite some time looking at some of the models and also these pieces of ram earth that arrived from Iceland a few days ago, because the students really did want us to have a piece of earth that was actually made in Iceland. When I opened the bucket, it was still very humid and smelly. You could really still smell, in a way, or a little bit, the air of Iceland. It's now dry, but that is what happens. Anyway, many stories, many circumstances, many pasts, and lots of narratives, and lots of willingness to share stories. The point now is, how do we learn, or what is it that we learn from them? How do we continue this kind of indigenous intelligence? No? So many of you are here tonight, and many of you, or I would like you to please explain your work whenever we are going to open the discussion for the others. Much better than whatever I could ever do. Anyway. Second exhibition, which I already mentioned, this is what I have to do because it's been a lot of work, so I have to advertise it. A lot with little. This is an exhibition but that is organized by architect and curator based in London, Noemi Blagger. Noemi sent us her work, and you can go watch the film that she has produced, made, curated inside the black room over there. As I mentioned, the couches are super comfortable. Take your time in lunch during the lunch breaks and go understand what is it that architecture can do with very, very little resources in all parts of the world. It's not only about remote places that we used to call global south, whatever, but there's a knowledge in order to make good but resourceless design all over the planet. The film is really nicely made. It's a triptych, so we placed 3 projectors. It's been a little bit of a technical challenge with the materials that we have, but please go watch it, spend some time over there. Again, I will not go into the details of the projects, just take a lunch break to visit them. So, I know I'm taking a little bit of time, but I needed to explain all the work that has been done by us. Now let's talk about, not that as I said, indigenism or indigenous knowledge per se, but because I think you all know very well about it. I wanted to have a BK Talks that talks about how do we teach as educators indigenous knowledge, and how do we also as researchers, or you as students, learn indigenous knowledge. Again, I believe that this exhibition is not there to be consumed. It's something that we need to learn from. So Tonight we have with us Paolo Cascone. If you don't mind, I will skip the reading long CVs. Please introduce yourself very briefly when you are going to address the audience. Paolo is the only person that you don't know. He teaches in London, and he has recently published, well, more than recently, I think this is like almost a week ago, this is still warm, African Fabbers Atlas. I think it's really nice that we have the vision and approach of somebody who is not at the faculty, in contrast with everybody else here, Heidi, Robert, and Tanea, and everybody else, of course, talking about the same topic, no? Robert, Tanea, Heidi. I wanted to very briefly introduce what is it that Pedagogies of Indigenism is for me. Also, like if I was one of them, how do I got to know about Indigenism? It happened in Australia, where I have been going very frequently in the last 3 years. There was a moment in which this summer I was invited to teach a seminar and a studio about whatever I wanted, about urbanization. And after a couple of years traveling frequently to Australia, I thought it would be really interesting to talk with the students about what country is. Country, the idea of country, I think is very difficult to explain now. I still have problems to explain it, but let's say that it's indigenous knowledge within the Australian territory. Let's just make it a short definition like that. So together with the students that are international students, we started asking ourselves what country is, or what country was. So each of them had complete different approaches to the idea of country, and that was great because it made the entire approach even more diverse, more complicated, of course, because we didn't know exactly what is it that we were doing, no? But anyway, it was a summer school, and in the end, ideas about connection to the land, connection to nature, and the role of nature, the symbols, the stories that are passed. I'm running very much about the ideas of countries that we analyze, but of course we have no more time, no? And where is it that indigenous peoples are now present within Australian society, and more in particular within the territory of Naarm, which is also known as the city of Melbourne. So what have been their struggles, and how indigenous design is actually being started to be implemented, always in the territory of Naarm, Melbourne. So in the end, we got to understand country to a certain extent, and finally try to also include data. Data is something that I have always been very interested in, datascapes in the 1990s, etc. So students did a great gathering of work, and finally, how do you show it? What we did was to try to use, in a systematic way, a system of mapping which is, again, very Western, of course. We did try out some things. I don't know, for those who don't know Naarm, the map is upside down, etc. But anyway, how to transmit all that information that we have gathered into maps, the same map that is repeated simultaneously, no? So in the end, we ended up producing this collection of maps, collection of data, and collection of knowledge about country, what country was, or what countries meant to this group of students. Anyway, the next thing that for me was also very important was to try to show that to a bigger audience. And in the end, well, this is a map that gathers all that information. And then how could we actually communicate that to others? And we made an exhibition, just like we had done an exhibition here. We created a glossary of Indigenous Intelligence in the territory of Melbourne. And then the students, well, did. This is a little bit the result. But I think what was very, very important was this moment in which the exhibition design becomes an icon in order to show something. They decided to make a Australian flag this way. It's very nice because you can only see it one way. So anyway, this is how they decided to express that country was also present within the institution. It's something that has of course been done before, no? And the presence of the Aboriginal flag is a design which is not uncommon, no? In the end, this is what happened. For the very first time, that flag appears within the walls of the university, no? It's a flag that actually, when you walk from that one side, you don't see it. You only see it when you work from one side, from the other side, which is a little bit of a metaphor of what indigenous knowledge or indigenous indigeneity is within the reality of Australia. It's there, but in many cases you don't see it. So anyway, this is what we did to the facade, and finally we looked at how people related to it. Anyway, in the end, we finished in the publication. This is what I try to teach from the point of view or my pedagogy of trying to understand a certain aspect of indigenous knowledge. But today we have other experts that are going to tell us how they teach indigenous knowledge, how they learn from it, how they research, etc. So I'm going to give the word, first of all, to Paolo, after this bit of a longer introduction, but sorry about that. I thought it was important that you know what is it that we've been doing. So, Paolo, I'll give you the clicker, and your presentation is ready. You don't need to push any button. It will just work.
Hello. Wow.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I have no voice, sorry about that. Teaching indigenous pedagogies, for me, is more like learning from indigenous technologies. I'm living in London, sure. I'm from Naples, Napoli, and I grew up in Africa. So for me, what I'm showing today is part of my story, my cultural path. And it's also what I'm sharing with a group of people from different backgrounds since, I would say, almost 15 years. I'm an architect, I'm an environmental engineer, and I started my investigation on synthetic vernacular architecture with this idea that we probably have to rediscuss the way we are extracting materials and the way we are assembling material according to different contexts, climatic contexts, but also geological contexts. And of course, we need to rediscuss this in different ways. African Fabbers is not a humanitarian project. I'm against a humanitarian project. I think that African Fabbers is more like a research platform that has been developed mainly in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, for a long time. But this project has been somehow expanded in different directions, connecting, bridging Western knowledge and African knowledge and pre-colonial knowledge. I think this is something that we need to address. We need to address this question of surpassing the dichotomy in between different knowledge. We need to find a way to rediscuss the relation between different approaches to technology, the social role of technology, and alternative economic model that are coming from that. And we need to do this in a way that the response should be diversified. The response should be diversified, and the technology should be integrated in a way that we could probably use indigenous technologies to address global challenge. Again, surpassing the rhetoric of greenwashing and all these kind of attached aspects related to technology and the built environment. So my statement with my students started with this idea that we have to create a shift. We have to create another way to see our Western country, technology and design approaches. And we need to do this by teaching alternative ways to study the history of architecture. I think this is the fundamental thing. We need to do that in a way that the diachronic approach to history of architecture should be like sort of transversal platform in which complexity is not the result of an advanced technology approach. Complexity is the way to work in osmosis with landscape, the work in osmosis with cultural heritage, in continuity, within an evolutionary approach, self-similarity, redundancy, adaptability. It's not just our way to think. It's something that is coming from different pre-colonial cultures. So we need to find a way to address these things, and we need to find a way to discuss the relation between climate issues, materiality, tectonics, ergonomic issues, communitarian issues. So this is one of the first maps I was discovering when I was approaching my research in Cameroon. I spent almost 5 years of my life in Cameroon. Cameroon has almost 5 climatic regions, from the very hot and dry to the very hot and humid. And has, I don't know, probably 110 different tribes and different communities, different languages. So Africa is a continent, and Cameroon is a continent. And the way that climate is affecting the way to respond to climatic issues is quite interesting, you know? It's quite interesting because it's the way that indigenous knowledge is somehow working with what is available on site, which is probably one of the topic of the exhibition. And thanks Javier for inviting me. And thanks everyone for your beautiful project. So this is an issue that has different aspects, not related to architecture, guys. Architecture is really lateral. This is about cultural anthropology. This is about computer science. This is about ethnomathematics. So Ron Aglish, which is also contributing in the book, is an ethnomathematician. He's not African. I'm not African. I'm not even Italian. I'm not sure where I'm coming from. But for sure, Ron Aglish was the first one who was starting to understand what does it mean to work with computational model, which are coming from indigenous knowledge in sub-Saharan Africa. Systems that are generating genotypes that are generating families of solution out of one tectonic. So this is intelligent for me. This is a way to respond in a site-specific way with protocols that are emerging. Guys, things are emerging because are working. Otherwise, people, especially with this kind of extreme climatic condition, they are not replicating. So beyond the rhetoric, the romanticism of building with these materialities, I think what is really relevant is the complexity. It's this question of creating differentiated space for differentiated communities, non-standard solution within a very interesting ecological approach. And from my point of view, the question of seeing construction as a collective practice, something that is part of a way to transmit a specific culture and a specific way to relate to ourselves. So I'm involved in robotics, of course. I'm running a lot of interesting workshops and courses on digital manufacturing. But I'm also interested in, the fathers of these technologies. This is a compass made out a friend of mine, which has died a few years ago, an Aga Khan Award architect called Fabrizio Carola. He was not African. He was Neapolitan like me. But he used to live in Mauritania for a long time and working for different people with different workers. And this is a compass which is somehow anticipating a lot of interesting things about placing component in the space, generating families of solutions, generate families of domes which are responding to different way to approach thermal aspect, daylight aspect, fluid dynamic issues, So robotic has fathers, and we didn't invent anything. And indigenous pedagogies, for me, is really a physical thing. I experienced this for 15 years with my African and European students, and I strategically spend at least 1 or 2 months with them on site, because indigenous pedagogies need to be with indigenous. And this is because physical constraints are shaping the agenda. How much water you need? Where are you taking this water? How hot is going to be the path from your construction site to the place where you're going to take it? So everything is about optimization, and everything is about sharing economy and sharing also energy. Of course, how do you process material in different ways? And again, the question of technology for me is something that we need to interfere with. So we started with many different people to understand how to extrude, for example, materials with robotic arms or 3D printers. But we start to also explain to ourselves how the pedagogy in this kind of context has to be completely rediscussed. Because there is a small problem, and the problem is that nothing is linear when you work in this kind of context. Because human beings are expecting something, and they want to share something, and you need to negotiate. So we need to teach the new generation of architects, no matter if they are coming from global south or global north, to negotiate, mediation at different levels, starting from the language of the street. So the school, the African Fabbers school, is a school which is on the street. We never had any kind of space. When we had the space, the school finished. And I will tell you a story about that. So the school is the street, and the street is a school. It's a way to bridge pre-colonial aspect, but informal aspect as well. These two things are creating like a sort of very interesting cocktail, something that is creating like a clash of digital cultures and vernacular cultures. This was a 3D printer developed by a group of students from Marrakesh and Fez at the Biennale of Marrakesh in Morocco. And basically they were developing, they didn't even think about that initially, but they developed one of the first 3D printer energetically self-sufficient, extruding local materials. So, and they did it for the markets. They wanted to actually produce and display things in different markets, in different places around Morocco. African Fabbers School for me was also questioning a crucial aspect, which is clients. No? Who are our clients? I don't even know. I started as a project manager in Paris, then in London, Milan. Start to walk everywhere, Doha, Qatar, and then say to myself, these people will never be my client for sure, for many reasons. And at the same time, you need to shape your client. You need to interview your client. You need to question your client. And clients are people that normally have very clear ideas about what they need. And then this means that we need to unlearn everything. Otherwise, we'll never be able to listen. Unlearn and listen. So the story is ending when we started to have one building. After 15 years of changing places, we've been in Ouagadougou, we've been in Bamako, we've been in Dakar, we've been in Pankisi, we've been in Douala. And then in Douala, we decided with a group of artisans to basically transform an abandoned building in Logbaba, an industrial neighborhood, into a school of fine art and a school of manufacturing. And so the students were the artisans. There were no architects at the very beginning. We started to do calls, and suddenly young architects from all the region, from Nigeria, from Ghana, Congo, unbelievable, and I didn't expect this, were starting to come over, sleeping just close to the site, and we start to build a laboratory. So we start to build a laboratory of manufacturing that is building the schools. So we didn't build the school from zero. We were training the people for years. And we actually starting to develop all the construction process, training the people to self-build their own space and their own school. So this is what we tried to do in almost 15 years. This is like a diagram which is starting from climatic issues, material system, construction, genotypes, programmatic agendas, communities, and projects. So it's a non-end process that could potentially and eventually shape many things. And the book is containing this experience, and I'm very happy to share this experience here, because I was like a lot of time of my life. So it was more like a way to say thank you to the people who was contributing to this project than for me to show up. I didn't even think to do a book when I start this experience and this adventure. So thank you so much.
The next presenter is Robert. So if you can borrow the clicker and the mic, let's go. I would like to beg you to please stick to 7 minutes so that we have more time for discussion later.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Let's say, as a non-indigenous person, like, I immediately thought the only way that I can contribute to this talk is from a decolonial angle. And I do that as a theorist who, for those who don't know me, is like highly fascinated by, well, all sorts of built environments, and the question why they're not part of our books and thinking and the way we study places. And so I wanted to start with, let's say, approaching the idea of radical indigenism from a decolonial stance. And in that regard, of course, I wanted to start exactly from the book that Javier was already mentioning, from Watson's book, Low-Tech Design by Radical Indigenism. And just think about, let's say, indigenism, or try to challenge the idea of indigenism as some sort of style or commodification of something that is already a universalization, because there's not just one indigenous people, there's myriads of indigenous people. So what is one singular indigenism? So I think of it more like I position myself as a radical indigenist. I try to become a radical indigenist in the same way that I consider myself a radical feminist. So it's a process where I try to become an ally in a fight for solidarity, in a different world, a different view of possibilities, how things are organized and structured. And as you already mentioned, this only involves unlearning and being open to all the other things that are out there that have also been rendered invisible. And the one thing that I kind of then immediately stumble on is the way that, at least the way the book is marketed, is still by subsuming indigenism as a low-tech something. And that makes me slightly allergic. So it's like, why do we still need this division into low-tech and branding it as such? And for me, that has something to do with what I would call a hangover of basically the Western systems of knowledge and how we rely on dichotomies, hierarchies, especially nature-culture divisions, both nature versus technology, culture versus technology, how these things form triangles that are then used to create hierarchies, and especially the role of the notion of technology therein to notions like development, progress, a specific Western understanding of what technology does. And I want to shake that up a little bit, and I apologize in advance if that gets slightly complicated, but we're talking about like both an ontological and epistemological level on which we have to challenge these ideas. So there is, I think, sorry, I don't get the order right here. There is, in recent scholarship, a shift in understanding anthropogenic environments. Anthropogenic environments are typically understood as, let's say, man-made environments, a problematic term. But if we start from a more reciprocal understanding, similar to what Churchill once said, we shape our environments and thereafter they shape us. Or can we even turn that around? Environments shape us first before we then modify them. Then we actually understand and we can be open to a variety of thoughts that have already been outlined. I'm totally not the first to do that. How environments actually make us human. How built environments historically made us human, how they dehumanize us in different ways. And that exactly opens to the question that you said, that we have to completely revisit the history of built environments in that regard. We have to maybe think about the way that environments make cultures differ, how they create different cultures, how they thus relate to what we in modern terms would call path-dependent evolutions. The point is that exactly this path-dependent evolutionary idea is exactly what underlies so many indigenous cosmologies. For example, the idea of dreamings in Aboriginal Australian cosmologies, that people define themselves not so much chronologically in terms of their origin, but literally where they come from. And more than a chronological question, this is a geographic spatial question. And it completely changes, let's say, the order in which cultures think and render themselves visible through these things. And in that regard, I want to make like a very weird conceptual shift here, because I want to introduce Yokwei's notion of cosmotechnics here. Because it is exactly from this reciprocal angle, I think, that we understand that how people adapt to environment is no longer just a matter of social or cultural practices, but a broader set of techniques. Foucault called them technologies of the self. Other people call them anthropotechnics, or techniques that make us human, and how they generate these cultures in the first place. In that matter, I want to exactly then discuss this idea of cosmotechnics, because it challenges a false Western modern notion that there is just one type of technology, and that then, for example, indigenous cultures have a lesser degree of that technology. Rather, what Wei argues is technologies are always constrained or enabled and constrained by cosmologies. And that means, in a sense, all the way that we think about the world, how we position ourselves in the world, how we conceptualize the world, how we conceptualize it, for example, as nature as divided from culture, or are they on a continuum, and so on. And what is then technicized therein? So, to just make another jump, this promotes an idea of technodiversity. There are multiple techniques out there, not just one type of technology. There's not one world. There is a world of many worlds, and they're created through worlding practices that engage cosmotechnical difference. If somebody is interested in that, I could promote, let's say, the last footprint issue, the TU Delft Theory Journal, which is exactly on that topic, and it's open source, and you can download it there. And it opens up these kind of questions that I just wanted to familiarize in some sense with, because it opens more questions than giving solutions, and just exactly then bring that back maybe to the question how we think about different cultures. Because, for example, here there's an image, for example, of longhouses in Borneo by Dayak people. And if we understand, for example, how our notion of architecture is constrained by our cosmologies, then we could listen to decolonial scholars that say that Western thinking is very particular in having a non-relational worldview. Everything is usually based on division, separations, classification. That's how space is produced. And all indigenous societies generally have relational ontologies. Then a Western pitfall is to pitch them against each other. The interesting thing is actually if we think about that we use relations of non-relations, then we are able to put them on the same level. We can understand them as a specific case, where, for example, whenever students in our faculty study the oikos as like a socio-political model, it's based on division, it's based on like certain units. Well, if we, for example, would study these longhouse societies in Borneo, South Asia, North America, these are all models that are based on community, on connection, on cross-clan relation, on multifarious intersectional nodes in which people identify themselves, in which groups are bound together through space, through rituals, in specific ways. And so it opens up an entire different way of thinking about spatial production. And for example, here the question that you also brought in is, what then is, like, what would be alternatives to the role of the architect if these structures are produced collectively and the knowledge of producing these structures is distributed in the community and therefore it's actually more stable. Therefore, like, these models have a much longer duration than types typically do. And you can also even think about these things on a much larger scale. So this is an example of an Inca administrative settlement and how it is related or placed in like a system of roads, Kapaknan, I think it's pronounced, that are super interesting to figure out how these are stations and like how they would maybe offer an alternative model than constantly looking at Rome and like aqueducts or something. Where we understand that and, for example, just understand how quipus, the way in which information was stored in the Inca Empire, had a close relation in function to the people that built these bridges that have already, so scholars call them mega quipu-like structures, and how even the roads produce a quipu-like system, and how that would be a completely interesting system to think through in itself, what it does, what it's capable of, what it produces in terms of other possible worlds, potentially. And the same, you brought in the fractal cities from Africa. I always am fascinated by Angkor, the hydropolitical system that it produces, these self-similar nested structures, how they coincide with political models of mandalas, how they exactly were intended to produce a redundancy in the system and the way it's formally structured, and the same way it didn't work out because it was too perfect. And then from the Khmer we can also learn how to survive climate change, for example. And just like as examples to open up the discussion, I want to end here.
Thank you very much, Robert. Let's give the floor to Tanea. I know Tanea is maybe a little bit tired, but she didn't sleep last night, so you know, so she's making a great effort to be here with us tonight. Thank you, extra thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. So I'm Tanea Baquin. I'm from Brazil, actually from where I just landed from. And let's see if... So I'm an associate professor in urban design and critical theory. And actually I'd like to change my position because I'm giving the back to the people that I'm talking about now here. I lost Yelmer in the meantime. You're there. So maybe I just sit here. So to start, actually, I brought this picture from the beautiful work of Yelmer. So I would like to walk you through the work of 3 students and then close with some projects that we have been working with. And what I find amazing about, let's say, to position oneself in relation to aspects of a site, of a culture, it's actually to see beyond what normally we have in front of us. Normally we look at things, but we don't see them. And I think that's an example of the work of Yelmer in really to try to situate oneself on its own history, on its own culture, and then from there start deconstructing things and trying to find new meanings to that. So it is about what Robert just said, so let's say to embrace this idea of perhaps of trying to understand indigenous conditions, so actually what it's of the site, it's about engaging with this relational quest. So what is the field? What has been in history? The field of relationships that have building conditions of life, that actually that even life that have been unfolding from this very complex network of relationships and values and meanings assigned to place. And that actually leads to ways in which we can, again, coming from our own way of understanding things, the way that actually we frame things, the distortions along the way, things that actually often we hide, even by design. So it is, at the end, it's always a matter of a project. So what is the project that it's assigned, and the way in which actually we see things? That even, again, for instance, a completely manipulated soil can actually be part of an indigenous way of, producing land and landscapes. So in the work of Jelmer, he was using especially this idea of the beaver as, let's say, as a metaphor to try to deconstruct the idea of the Dutch culture in the production of the Delta landscape. So the beaver as this ecosystem engineer, and actually also the Dutch being very much this ecosystem engineer in its history, and what type of culture that has produced in time, and what is the condition of the delta and the wetness that normally we don't perceive it, as in being over-manipulated and controlled. And knowing that, for instance, the risks that actually we are facing nowadays, they are very much the outcome. So the risk of drought, of subsidence, it's very much the consequence of this over-manipulation of the land. So just an example again of the work of Jelmer, a very extensive critical inquiry on the history of the Dutch landscape, and trying to position oneself in the outcomes of that in present life, in contemporary life, and the deconstruction also, of the idea of the city, of, to belong to a place, to have rights, to be part of that place. So at the end, again, going back to the idea of framing, so actually what we are framing and how, especially, how things are being represented. Now moving to another work of a student, Julia Dyer, moving to the Amazon. So Julia was actually showing, especially trying to deconstruct the idea of the Amazon from another form of extractivism, which is tourism, and especially showing the power relationships in that. And you can see, you cannot read, but a way that we have been working with students, it's to try as much as possible to be precise, if we can use that word, in in mapping everything that it's in the play, so in the field of relationships, and trying in that sense, in that exercise of mapping, to somehow to tackle the complexity of things in time and space, and from that point to see how actually we might project a action forward. And this map, especially for me, it's quite telling from Brazil, because this is a map that shows that Brazil has 305 ethnic groups, indigenous ethnic groups, of which about 284 different languages. But then when the Portuguese came, it was a tabula rasa. It was a place that actually nobody was living there. So it was a place to be a very large geography to be conquered. So that's often the history that even us Brazilians, we don't know. So the history starts actually 500 years ago when the Portuguese came after the Tordesilhas Treaty, and with the Spanish start subdividing South America. But it's quite amazing to see that actually and it still is, an extremely dense country out of very different indigenous ethnic groups. So again, how actually the point of framing, of how actually we tell stories, the things that actually we allow them to surface, and then how we have been manipulating for different purposes. And this act of colonization has continued in history. This is during the 60s, the 70s, the idea of the Amazon of being a place to be destroyed, to be conquered for modernization. It goes along with the dictatorial regime and the political quest as well, to show a specific image of the country. And even to, let's say, the effort as well to mimic, to go to places of indigenous life and to mimic oneself in that specific condition and trying again to tell different stories about it. But there are many forms of resistance, and I think especially perhaps the conclusion of the work that I'm going to show now of Lucas de Joia, it's an example of that. So that we might actually look for different ways of understanding how infrastructure has been deployed to show a different idea of a country and the relationships again alongside of that. This is still the work of Julia, showing different options, let's say, of going about the coexistence of, let's say, forms of cultural exploitation of the Amazon in relation to the possible environmental rehabilitation of sites as Altar do Chão. So going now to the work of Lucas, which was an extremely important work in the context of our graduation studio some years ago, as well about the Amazon, about a very contested project in the Amazon, the Belo Monte Dam in the Xingu River. And his work was mostly about, let's say, the idea of a possible mediation between the indigenous culture, the modern culture of, let's say, of progress in Brazil, and the culture, let's say, and the ecology of the site, so in these different cosmologies. And he was trying to engage in a way of mediating these different, let's say, the coexistence of these different worldviews, perhaps the ecological, the modern, and the indigenous. But the outcome of his work was that shows that actually the mediation of the dam, of these three different systems, to see ways forward, to, let's say, to try to mitigate the impact of the dam, was not actually the ideal way ahead. That maybe a much more stronger position, being against the dam, would be actually the best outcome of a way of engaging in a design project with such a level of complexity. So my point here is that there are many things to be, to be discovered, to be read whenever we are about to engage in complex sites of, let's say, of a palimpsest of different cultures, of different histories. We have to somehow to try to approach them, I think, in a humble, in a sensitive way, and to see again if there are ways, possible ways forward. And perhaps to conclude, look into two research projects that we have been working with. So this idea of translations, of actually what is the condition of the present. It's a project that we have been working for the past 5 years in India. It's a bilateral cooperation between India and the Netherlands. And the main question of the project to start was, can we take Dutch technology to solve water issues in secondary cities in India? And we opposed that right from the beginning in the proposal phase, saying that actually we're never going to do that. It's about actually a context in which we have to construct a dialogue and in a knowledge exchange see again ways forward. So again, in understanding what could be the design space, I'm showing again ways of that we work with taxonomies of knowledge, of aspects of values that we might have to engage, and ways of seeing different scales, different scopes of design. And I think this is an important drawing in which we've tried to map the logic of water development in such cities. So what has been from the traditional water practices to the moment, let's say, of colonization, of English colonization, and the change in the modernization of water infrastructure, and what might be, again, a future moving from that. So you can see fluctuations in terms of values, in terms of political power, let's say, power relationships, economic issues at site, and how actually this might influence moving forward in terms of, improving water provision and management. Always working throughout different scales, from understanding the context of a basin down to the ensemble of life, to the specific practices that come from traditional knowledge, and engaging with more contemporary practices. So just showing examples of, again, moving into mapping from urgencies of the present to uncertainties that have been built in a path dependency from the past to the present to the future, engaging that into the level of detailing of, of how actually these traditional practices might be somehow revisit in terms of contemporary urgencies and uncertainties. And to very much conclude, this is a picture of 4 days ago in Porto Alegre. So we started a new project after the extreme floods that happened in May 2024 in the southern state of Brazil. And this is the most, let's say, vulnerable, fragile site. It's an archipelago of 5 islands forming the delta, a delta called Jacuí Delta. And what you can see here is an extremely, well, we might say, vulnerable community. However, indigenous from the site, it's a group of fishery families, of families that have been, actually that chose to live on those islands because of a certain way of life. They cannot be living there because the islands, the delta, constitute an environmental park. However, they have been living there for many, many years. So it's a question of belonging, to belong to a place, and the human right to stay in such place. So the project is engaging with this condition of being those families exposed to extreme risk, but at the same time they have the right to stay. So how, again, we might mediate that? What are ways to understand how the history of their families, how actually they have been occupying such a space, such a landscape, transforming and producing such a landscape, and what might be ways forward, thinking that, well, they have also to be able to sustain their lives and the lives of future generations. And how do we see that? This is some of my Dutch colleagues moving in the waters of the 5 rivers, engaging into this delta, and trying again to, in this process of framing, seeing things perhaps with external set of eyes, but trying to engage with with the identity of the local site. Thank you so much.
It's the turn for Heidi. Could you please? I'll do it. No, pass the clicker. Yeah, thank you.
Now I have 2 mics. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Robert, Tania, and Paolo, and of course to Javier, Renz, and all the other team members of the BK program. I think this is a really, really very important exhibition. So I have done this a bit differently. Oh, first I have to, of course, wear my glasses. Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit perhaps to those of you who don't know me. I'm Heidi Sohn. I'm actually the group leader of the Architecture, Philosophy and Theory group. And as such, I was not here prepared to show any of student work or any other kind of images. So what I'm going to present today is actually a statement of sorts with no images, just colors, and the colors come from somewhere. These are colors that are extracted from the flags of indigenous groups. So I'm going to read instead of speaking, and this is mainly for me to keep a little bit of track with what I want to say. So I want to begin, first of all, and very importantly, by acknowledging the injustices that have been perpetrated against countless humans and non-human others by a myriad colonizing projects in the name of Western civilization. The challenge of overcoming the traumas of loss, genocide, systematic exploitation for indigenous people and their life worlds are real and very present, as are the many ongoing forms of decolonizing activist movements to reclaim land and rights. These are not metaphors and should never be overlooked, especially not in institutions of higher education in the heart of the West, the belly of the extractivist monster. We should also be aware of how and why monolithic categories operate in Western classification systems and discourse. These taxonomies have a purpose and are not innocent. Categories often mask what they try to conceal, namely difference itself. As such, they include the structures, the ideologies, the processes, and the mechanisms that produce them in the first place. The category of indigenism bundles together the incredible diversity of indigenous ways of knowing and being, reducing the inherent differences among each one of them into a homogeneous class that derive from pre-contact, pre-contest, pre-colonial, pre-modern cultural worldviews of calendars and geographies that are essentially different from Western ones and that have resisted somehow monohumanism. But an uncritical and usually anthropological approach runs the risk of rendering indigenism as ancient, as happening in the past, or as peripheral, as happening in the blind spots of our own modern perspectives, while ignoring that indigenous cultures are alive and evolving despite of dominant Western monologics. So, while considered minoritarian in global demographics, indigenous peoples are the carriers of more than 4,000 languages, accounting for more than 96% of the languages presently spoken on the planet. Each one of these languages represents extensive and complex knowledge systems and cosmologies that have evolved over millennia, and that without exception are connected to deep understandings of the land and ecosystemic processes. Recent data shows that indigenous peoples care for or hold tenure rights to at least a quarter of the Earth's land surface, about 40% of remaining natural lands globally, and a third of intact forest landscapes, which overlap with key ecosystemic areas for global biodiversity. Recent studies show how that biodiversity thrives on lands managed or co-managed by indigenous communities, much more so than unprotected areas or wildlife reserves. So the cultural and biological diversity that is found on indigenous territories has co-evolved over time, underpinned by sophisticated intergenerational practices and relationships of living reciprocity and kinship, not as connected or somehow coupled forms of existence, but as truly entangled. This entanglement is difficult for non-Western or non-indigenous people to fully grasp, as we have been raised and educated under the assumptions of temporal linearity and the fallacies of nature-culture and the body-mind-soul divide. So it is here, in the entangled relations of indigenous people and other living beings and abiotic systems, that I want to draw the thread to the theme of today's conversation, namely to pedagogy. So I understand pedagogy as the ways in which we engage with the dynamic processes of learning with an environment, as the unfolding of process, rather than in compliance with institutional structures and educational models that reflect dominant neoliberal and colonizing technologies of homogenization and the eradication of difference by forced assimilation. These ideas are based on capitalist principles of scarcity and deficit. As such, they justify and they reproduce self-serving and short-sighted attitudes of extraction, accumulation, dispossession, and waste. There are many connections to how projects of education have been utilized as a colonizing technology based on the scarcity of the possibility of learning, the very well-known banking approach that was famously critiqued by Paulo Freire, that explain why mainstream educational models rely on the triad of content, clock, and result. So I want to focus instead on the philosophy of the gift that is common to many indigenous cultures. This will require a switch in our understanding of the gift as a token for a transactional exchange in economic terms, as currency or sacrifice. Indigenous gift-giving and receiving are expressions of highly sophisticated distributive intelligence, the sharing of abundance to ensure the continuity and thriving. Gifts have agency and affect beyond transactional logics. They are relational. They foster a sense of gratitude for the abundance shared and to understand how much is enough. They require to know the giver, be it human, animal, plant, or land, understand the terms in which the gift is given, and on how to reciprocate responsibly to maintain a healthy and lasting balance. As the gift passed on from ancestors to future generations, as the seventh generation principle of the Iguan nation exemplifies. So indigenous philosophies of the gift foster an attitude of giving back to the land, to the community, and to future generations, so they too may thrive. Decision-making is a careful listening not only to the voices of ancestors and the needs of a present community, but to the voices of a changing environment, to anticipate the impact of each action within complex, dynamic, and adaptive systems over time. Reciprocity, relationality, relevance, regeneration, and responsibility, the 5 R's of indigenous value systems that guide the idea of continuity of life as a gift, serve not only as an interpersonal protocol among humans, but underpin advanced forms of 4-dimensional transdisciplinary approaches to complex Earth systems. These resonate with contemporary theories on sustainability, circularity, and environmental awareness, which often incur in the so-called Columbus problem, claiming to have discovered something new that already existed in indigenous knowledge. So the groundswell of work that is being produced by indigenous intellectuals, practitioners, artists, and activists today is making it evident who the forerunners of such knowledge really are. So in receiving their indigenous knowledges as gift, we may begin to rethink the role of pedagogy as a way of fostering an understanding and a sensibilization to indigenous environmental logics based on place knowing, the attunement to and with the environment, rather than on place making, the intervention on the environment. These logics are forms of intelligence that today are more urgent than ever and directly involve all spatial and material disciplines and practices, including architecture, urbanism, landscape design, and planning, as the work of my colleagues here and the work of everybody in this exhibition is already embodying. So despite of this, it is uncommon to find programs in architectural schools that offer curricular components that engage with indigenous knowledges from an environmental point of view, or that develop counter-pedagogical strategies to mainstream education. So in regions where the colonial settlers have historically coexisted with indigenous communities on occupied or ceded land, the preoccupation to include indigenous knowledges is more present than in continental Europe, where the contact between native settler slaves has been erased or assimilated. So the parameters and needs are different, but not our responsibility with the environment and with the continuation of life on the planet. In that sense, it might be worthwhile as educators, researchers, and students to focus on finding shared problems and commonalities between indigenous forms of knowing and contemporary architecture, as well as the kind of conventional pedagogies that we use to teach it, by asking a few speculative questions. What would happen if we adapted our teaching learning, regardless of which course, to reflect the principles of indigenous pedagogies? What if we provided an indigenous focus, like we already seen is happening, when dealing with global issues of design and architecture? What if we approximated common issues such as the environment, context, community, collective memory, heritage, technology, and the agency of materials using an indigenous lens? What if we reconnected Western notions and theories that are already deeply entwined in our architectural and design lexicon, for example, process, relationality, material cultures, ecologies, technicities, by incorporating the important work of indigenous scholars and architects instead of continuously citing the usual white suspects? What if instead of using the buzzwords of sustainability and circularity, we raised awareness of the importance and value of co-creation of intergenerational projects? So I would like to end by saying that our generation, the mid-generation of humanity, has inherited the terrible gifts and wicked problems wrapped up as a triple planetary crisis: climate change, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity. While we will not be able to solve these problems, of course, we are nonetheless obliged to honor the philosophy of the gift, to receive it, to know when enough is enough, to give back, and to ensure the continuation of at least 7 future generations. And for that, we need indigenous intelligence and a radically changed pedagogy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi, for... let's keep this slide here. I think that, well, more than questions, there are rhetorical questions. I think there are propositions, but, let's talk about it. I would also like to open the floor for discussion to everybody in the room. So please do not hesitate to ask for the microphone, raise your hand, and participate. I will start with a first question, but I would like everybody to please intervene whenever you feel like it. The idea of these BK talks is not to have a panel versus a tribune. Okay, so actually, spatially, we always try to make it more inclusive, but it doesn't really work all the time. But anyway, the intention is to do something else. Anyway, just to open the conversation, after hearing the four of you speak, I already hate this setting, by the way, but it's fine. No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't go. No. I have been taking notes. I also have my questions, but I read about restudying history, unlearning, decolonize, counter-pedagogical. There's like we need to react, apparently. It's obvious that we need to react, and you are mentioning it. I think you mentioned it in different ways. Obviously, in the last intervention, very much so. But my question, I know it's complicated, but how do we do that? You just mentioned, no, that we need counter-pedagogical strategies. We are educators. I am a Western educator. How do I, or is it possible to include this knowledge within our curricula, making it as important as other technocratic approaches that we are very used to? This is a question I open to you and the rest of the audience. Sam.
I think we have to step out the door of this institute and get to know the world from the place, basically. So, I mean, we can theorize, we can think, and I think as a student we don't move much further than a site visit. Maybe we should be on the site always, and maybe once a week we should go to the institute. Now it's the other way around. Maybe that would be a start.
I really would like to react to this. I fully agree, and I understand what you're saying. And the connection to the land, so to know the land as a giver of the abundance of the things that we actually need to sustain and live, does not mean that we need to go out in nature. It means really to understand your context. And learning happens in an environment, and if the environment is the school, right? So it's not so much to change the environment, but to understand what kind of unlearning processes we need to engage. So how can we unlearn, first of all, to not keep on doing the inertia of how we teach and what we do, and the sources we refer to, but how can we together change the environment in which learning is possible? Right? So it can happen in a seminar setting. When you change the environment, learning can happen. And it doesn't need to be only about indigenous knowledges. It can be about knowing yourself. Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree, yeah.
Does anybody else know how? There.
I would. Oh my God, it's so weird. This.
Do you mind standing up so that we can see you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Even more weird.
You can't imagine how weird this has been for me for many years. So.
Yeah, I would just add to what was already said, because I think it's, from my perspective, because I'm thinking a lot about it. I think it's really both, because we can't just go to wild nature and forget that this exists, because this is everywhere, and we need to be in the system to change the system, but also we need to go out of the classroom, out of the building to sense and to attune the environment, as you said. So I think it's just the mindset, so how we approach. If we are here, also this floor and everything in the metal, it looks, it's very man-made and artificial, but it also comes from the earth in some ways. So how do we relate to materials what are around us? That we connect and we are aware that, okay, they were extracted maybe in a really bad way, but it's still from the earth. So how can we cherish it or mourn everything what happened in the process, and imagine differently. So it's also, we are Earth, our bodies are Earth. We're all indigenous in some way. It's just a matter of, do we have this connection and knowledge or not? So, it's trying to connect to the land where we are already, and of course seeking for more and sensing and not just thinking and being in theory and words, because we are more than just words. I also... Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Elena has also a comment or question. It's going to work, don't worry.
Oh, yeah. I think it's completely necessary, both. One is for a self-criticism, and another is that you cannot understand a practical philosophy if you don't live it. No? And I think the entanglement is so great and the complexity is so great, and I understand that maybe it's not for everyone to go to those places, because sometimes it's very uncomfortable, it's very, in many senses, no? But it is completely necessary, and I think also there is, through experience and bodily experience, there is another level of information that you get, and then you need to deconstruct and think about it, and then the critical theory it becomes really important to not fall in ingrained patterns, no? In how do you do it? How do you represent it? How do you find another language, another architectural language that would suit the voice and the knowledge of those people, and our knowledge, because we have already certain tools. So it's not that we are going to discard the tools we have, but we can create maybe another new language by creating a new language of two ways of thinking at the same level, let's say. And for that, the critical theory and the thinking and the school is also necessary. And I think it's a back and forth.
Yeah. I think what Elena bringing with this duality is really interesting. But I'm not sure if it needs to be addressed constantly by moving to the context more than opening up our context here. I understand that it's a very Western institution. I'm indigenous from North America, Turtle Island, and the ways of knowing and the ways of giving knowledge and sharing knowledge and teaching knowledge is completely seen different. It's a lot knowing by making and repetition of seeing someone doing something. And then if you want to get knowledge, then you can just ask for it and offer something. But then the knowledge is given to you by what we call elders, which are not necessarily older people. They're just knowledge keeper, I would say. And the elders have knowledge that you don't question necessarily. It's a little bit like reading a scientific article. Like if it's peer reviewed, then you accept it, right? Okay, you can question the level of peer reviewedness, or of course, but an elder is by default peer reviewed, and I'm trying to promote that and say that in my stuff, and people are like, but how many elders have said that? And I'm like, the number, that's irrelevant. You don't say how many people have wrote the same paper. So yeah, I think it's just like opening our minds to different ways of knowing and different ways of sharing this knowledge within Western academia.
Yes, I fully agree actually with the point of open oneself, no, to the other. And I think it starts actually with question, no? So how do we position ourselves within a specific context? How do we raise questions? I believe it's also about accepting the discomfort that we're never going to be able to represent the other. We can only represent maybe ourselves, and even so with difficulty most of the time. So let's say the effort of, let's say, from a Western institution to try to teach or to replicate, to mimic conditions that have unfolded in a multiplicity of histories and conditions elsewhere, with different value sets, with different ways of understanding life, of creating life. I think this is extremely challenging, but we can make this effort of raising questions and actually how those questions might inform and, let's say, this practice of trying to be as much as possible open to the other. And then with this also about the discomfort, I also would like to bring an example of that I have been experiencing myself and another colleague, Brazilian colleague as well from our department. So, for instance, in this Indian project, we were not Dutch, but we were the Dutch in the Indian context. So, who were we then? No. So there was a third culture, actually, with the lenses that we have, entering the context and trying to establish a relationship with that, with such a traditional and so dense and rich culture as the Indian culture. And then now it's even, the paradox is that it's even happening now with us in Brazil, because we are Brazilians, but we are Dutch. So, and even so, we come even from the same region and from the same city that we are working. We have not, our profession has not been developed, our practice is not there. So we are facing discrimination because we are not Brazilian enough. So I think this is extremely interesting. In that sense, I think that's something that might unite most of us here. We come from different places. And then we go elsewhere to study, to engage in a profession, and then doing that we acquire elements along the way, and then we construct our own identity. So I think it's an extremely beautiful challenge to try to, again, to see the other, and try to engage in the way that we can. But I think it's very important to do so in a humble manner, knowing that, again, that we have to accept a lot of discomfort along the way.
I can basically continue on what Tanya was saying. I was exactly going to kind of reach there. I think the whole idea of the indigenism or indigenist is wrong. I think it's coming from the kind of colonial context. So there is no other way than doing things like that, basically, right? And I think what also Tanya is kind of offering is that I think we are always in proximity of the things. I cannot be indigenous. I have been working all my life about Iran, but I'm still far, and I think we get into the proximity of the things, which is never 0 and 1, basically. And so I think a lot of these things that we kind of discuss are sort of, again, coming from, this kind of intention. You can't be living your life somewhere and then you kind of become indigenous. I think it's not about that also, right? You kind of, through a kind of certain procedure, basically, you kind of start to get to proximity of something. An institution, funnily enough, is part of it, basically. So it's not that it's bad or good, somehow. It's part of the procedure. So I want to say, really, that there is no other way than what it is. I think thinking from the point of view of language, Farsi, indigenous is such a wrong language, And once we were trying to write a paper, we were working on this project on thirst and mirage, basically. And we just realized how much this word is wrong, because it kind of contains a lot of histories and is coming again from a certain kind of reaction to something that it kind of, it becomes wrong. So I think we should just put all these things away somehow and try to kind of get to that proximity.
If I can add, there's a question there. So while the microphone gets there, I would like to ask you then what terms could be used. I'm trying to learn. But something that I agree very much is with the fact that I don't think that indigenism is about far versus near. No, I have the impression that the conversation is going a little bit like the remote versus us. No? And one of the things that this exhibition tries to demonstrate very much, no matter the word that we're using, and I agree with you that probably we need to revise it, is that there's a large amount of projects whose location is a few kilometers from here, who's done by indigenous peoples in the Netherlands. I think you mentioned Jelmer, and you showed a lot of images from your work, no? So I don't know, I'm not sure about the idea that indigenism is about far and close, remote, we go to places or not. I have the impression that there's a certain system of values that have to do with rituals, with stories, with community making, with connection with the land, etc., that we can learn from indigenous culture, or I don't know how to call them, that actually are as important and as interesting as the peer-reviewed system, what you just said. I completely agree. So I don't know if we are wrong in the sense that there is the remote versus here, the institution. I think that maybe there's a system of values that need to be put into place, and this is what the exhibition tries to demonstrate, beyond there and here. Anyway, sorry, that was a comment coming from, I think there's a question there.
Yeah,
there's two questions there, I think. Yeah, okay.
I just wanted to kind of go back to something that was mentioned before, because we keep using the words of representation in language, and I think there's, of course, the very hard task of trying to represent it in the way we do in like academia, but I think the hardest is actually to understand how they communicate and pass through from generation to generation, the sensitivity of like the way they read their site. And I'm wondering if that's one step that we could do to kind of integrate this more into our process, because the hard part is actually to being able to see, and I think that's something that was also mentioned in from the panelists. And it also raises me a second question, and when you say that you don't think it's that we are not talking about distance or being far away, I have the impression that sometimes most of the communities or indigenous people use this type of distance also as a way of protection and defense, because through research you see that most of the knowledge you really have to dig in to kind of find, because they play kind of under the radar. My research, for example, was done in Brazil, and the state that this community was a part of, it's one of the most violent places for researchers of ecology, but also for community activists. So I think in a way, not being widespread, it's also one of the forms of being protected. And I wonder if there is a way that we can overcome that to bring this more to the academia, but at the same time, what's the limit that we can intervene without actually putting them to threat?
Can I react to your? So I think part of why it seems as if it is hidden, first, is because we haven't been looking, number one. And number two, because what I call the groundswell, like something that suddenly comes up from the ground and starts to become available, visible, retrievable, accessible to all of us, it's not a coincidence that it's happening now. So only think about the case in North America. There were residence schools until the 1950s, till the 1960s. I mean, a lot of the educational accessibility was actually not given to indigenous populations. I think of my country in Mexico. Education is seen as a commodity for the privileged. So that now we are getting to read, and of course you have to look for it, but now that we're getting to read and to be in contact with the work of indigenous scholars and intellectuals and artists, and now it's when we're seeing what happens after this kind of opening up of education to let's call it not a social constructivist project. So it took time, and this is what I also think about the intergenerationality. It is not about only elders talking in a circle to other indigenous people of their own clans, but it has to do with how the intergenerationality of indigenous intelligence comes through time, with time. It takes time to yield results. It's not immediate. So now it's our responsibility to open up to the work that is being produced and listen to it right? That's what I think.
So I want to bring it back to one word that I heard, I don't remember exactly where, which is the pluriverse, which is this idea of cosmologies that exist in different regions of the world and are all of them valid at the same time, and all of them have something to teach to the others. I think when we overcome that idea of us versus them, and we realize that we're a species that we've managed to build up different kinds of knowledge and different truths that have the capacity to teach each other things, we realize that the global problem that we've generated as this global community has to be dealt by those different truths working together to overcome the problem. By that I mean that we just have to acknowledge that we're not one single group, and that the geographical differences that just define our cultures manage to give us the tools to engage in different aspects of one single problem that we're all facing. And that's the value of indigenism, that if the word is wrong or not, I think that's it's a little bit over the problem. It's just seeing that there are things that we're not engaging directly because we just say, oh yeah, the Western world has the technology for it. Maybe if we see it as like not technology, but tools that we have to work with and come up with different solutions for shape, form, technologies, instruments, I don't know, whatever.
Thank you. Inga?
If I just... so, two things about this idea of indigenous being far and the question of using indigenous words. I think it's important to make the distinction how we, in what context we use indigenous as a word, right? So if we use it to just mean, because indigenous means of the land, like an indigenous plant means a plant that was there to begin with. So that was not exported from or imported from elsewhere. So if we use indigenous in the context of talking about colonialism and decolonialism, or colonization and decolonization, then it takes a whole new sense and a whole new meaning, and it no longer just means of the land. It kind of opposed to alloctonous, or the person that is not from here. That being said, I want to also bounce on what Heidi and, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, mentioned about the indigenous knowledge, because I faced that problem when I was on a committee, an architectural committee for a project, and there was some part of the indigenous knowledge that the group of indigenous people didn't want to share. And they were like, oh, but we're not going to tell you this. And they were like, yeah, but we're doing this with you, for you. And the response was like, yes, but that kind of niche knowledge, that belongs to us, and we'll never share that. And there was kind of an incomprehension, right, between the indigenous and the alloctonous at that meeting. And basically the explanation was, you tried, and this you is impersonal, please don't feel that it belongs to you. So you tried to repress and erase our culture, but not only our culture, like us, like genocide us, for so many years and decades, if not centuries. And now, all of a sudden, it's cool and interesting, and now you want to know about it, and now, like, for example, the medicinal plants, it's interesting to know what it is, but it's also interesting to know where they are. Well, no indigenous community will tell you where they are. They'll tell you what it is and what it does, because that is good for you and for your health, and they want you to be healthy. But they won't tell you where to find it, because that's their personal reserve for them to gather. So that is the kind of knowledge that is not to be shared. And it's, I don't want to use that word, it's unfortunate, but I think we have to respect, like, others people who want to.
Inge.
Yeah.
Can you?
Well, I think it's very interesting what you're saying because I'm very puzzled about the whole discussion here. You know? I'm from landscape architecture, and we teach, of course, our students to, let's say, read the landscape, to understand its transformations over time. Very often, of course, interfered by humans, and for a long time, humans, which we maybe call today indigenous, live together with the landscape, respecting it, taking from it, giving to it, etc. And I feel a bit that we, let's say, in the West, becoming very jealous about that knowledge and about that. It's a bit like what you're saying. So I find that I'm very interested in these kind of knowledge, but more in the way of understanding it and, of course, learning from it. I really would like to do that, but I'm very aware of that it is not about, you know, how should I say it, taking away and so on. I think we should be a bit more humbled. You know, we are the idiots, after all, now, to go this wrong path. And there are still some people who have the knowledge, and only a few left, who have the knowledge and who can live in a kind of I wouldn't say harmony, but in a kind of tolerance, in a kind of together with, I don't know if you want to call it nature, landscape, or whatever. So, I'm not so sure about, you know, some people bring it totally political, others are about we should go there, help them, tell them, do things together, etc. I think we need to find some other ways, and I don't have the solution on it, but I think we should at least try to stand on the same thing, and that maybe say, we want to learn something from you. It's time to learn from them, from many of these people which we neglected, I think, and called the ones who were not wanting to modernize, etc.
Thank you, Inge. Paolo has a question. In the meantime, Paolo, maybe you can. Paolo, go ahead.
Should I go? I think it's like I'm from Colombia, and I had a background from my bachelor in Colombia.
Do you mind coming here? Because otherwise...
More?
Nothing happens if you sit there. Nothing at all.
No, to the spot. And basically, what I feel is like architecture projects approach to these communities. We need to complete them. We need to fix them. We need to put it in our like kind of point of view, and it's always like placing the Western in the future and the rest in the global South in the past. So I have always the feeling that it's like the way like projects are like placed and like the entire concept of it, that they're always in the past, or we are always in the past, including me, like, and then that Europe, it's the only word and the only element that kind of like fix the problem. And also it's like architects, also we feel like this savior kind of like element that we are going to save them from anything, so we are going to fix their problems. And I think that's one of the main problems. How do we achieve architecture, how we approach architecture, that we're going to fix and help them to be better.
Thank you. Let me give the last moment to our guest, Paolo. I hate to say this, but we are really over time. Paolo?
No, thank you. Very quickly, I think there is something that we need to rediscuss about authorship, guys, because I think the question of indigenous knowledge is really about, I would say something a little bit political, sorry about that. We have to renounce to authorship if we want to really engage ourselves in something bigger, which is a little bit more out of conventions. Because in the end, this is about what I was mentioning before, synthetic vernacular, which is not an exotic thing. It could be also 5 kilometers from here. Synthetic vernacular is this capability to transform something informal in a process that could be somehow open to different people. Umberto Eco was saying something about opera aperta, architecture as an open device, which I think is a very interesting metaphor. Because in the end, if I have to give you an example from my experience in sub-Saharan Africa, I think the best one is the Mosque of Jenne I was showing before, which is a UNESCO mosque, one of the most ancient ones. There was a story that a few years ago, like a German university, I won't name this university, was proposing to the local community a product that was like fixing the material of the mosque, which is adobe. So I imagine at every raining season, this mosque is completely changing. Because for 1 month and a half, it's raining with the same amount of water that you normally have for 12 months. So the people were actually disappointed. There's a lot of money. So they were thinking, but they were also disappointed. They refused, actually, this proposal to have like a fixed building. The building was, for them, a way to, every year, make 1 week of party and rebuilding, self-similar, always different, always similar. The people were collaborating in different ways, different background, different gender. So I was more than like a construction site. I think I was, again, a way to share knowledge, which is completely different from what we normally do in universities of true code. So we cannot actually change our system, but we can actually transform this in a more open system, and learning from, not from the statics of these cultures. I think it's difficult, it's delicate. We could become naive sometimes. This is what I think about myself. Every time I'm trying to say to myself, I don't want to be naive. I just listen and then eventually say something or do something. But yet the question is being part. So it's rethinking authorship. Are you available? Because, architects and designers are building their own profession on authorship. I'm saying this because when they ask me who's going to be the author of the African Faber book, I say to myself, fuck, I have to put my name on this. And then we say, okay, let's make it like in a way that I'm coordinating like hundreds of people or like as a driver. So authorship is, I think, a key topic. Who's the author? If we need an author.
Thank you very much, Paolo. As I mentioned, I hate to do this, but it's 7:15, and people are working here to make this possible. So again, I would like to thank you very much for being here today, so numerous. Thank you very much again to the panelists. And thank you very much, especially to all of you who so generously, again, I don't mind repeating myself, gave us your work sometimes, like if you are donating something which is very, very personal. For some of you, it's been really something of an effort to do, and I want to appreciate it again and again. I don't know maybe that much about indigenous knowledge, but what I have learned throughout these years in other places is values of humility and care. And I think that if you start looking at a lot of the work that is here and read carefully what is there, there's a lot of humility and care, which I try to communicate to my students here at the Faculty of Architecture. Thank you very much again. We will meet next April 22nd for the screening of the movie A Lot with Little, which is now being shown in the Black Room. We will show it here. Naomi Blagger, the author, architect, and curator, she will have a conversation with us. I hope it will be a great moment not to only learn about architecture, but how to visualize it and how to show it to others. Thank you very much and see you soon.